committed to inspiring individuals, families, and communities to achieve holistic growth and sustainable transformation. As the founder and principal consultant of Wholeness Incorporated and the executive director of the Niemani family in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, USA, she combines strategic leadership with a passion for community development. Zimbabwean born and passionate about the development of the African continent, Cynthia is currently based in the US, where her work continues to bridge global and local perspectives on sustainable change. With expertise in leadership development, trauma-informed care, and intergenerational dialogue, Cynthia has dedicated her career to rebuilding brokenness and fostering resilience. Her work at the Niemani family highlights her commitment to empowering undeserved communities through programs that promote healing, personal growth, and self-sufficiency. As an author and speaker, Cynthia delivers powerful insights into personal growth and collective transformation, equipping audiences to navigate life's transitions with purpose and grace. Her work continues to leave a profound impact on both local and international platforms. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Cynthia to talk a bit more about goal set, a bit about herself, and then talk a bit about goal setting. Now, as you listen through the presentation, please do type in any questions that you may have, as we'll have some Q&A towards the end of the session to just talk through any questions you may have around how do you stick to goals, or even, what does a good goal look like, etc., etc. So Cynthia, I can see that you're sharing your screen, so I'll hand it over to you. But once again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Eloise, and greetings to everyone who's joining from all parts of the world. It's very early morning here in Wisconsin, and we've got freezing temperatures today. And I'm so grateful for this invitation and just for this time and season when we can reflect on goals. And what better time for us to do that than right in January? I always believe that the way that we start a year sets the tone to greater things. So I'd like to just honor those that have taken time to make this vision possible, and just to make sure that we are all here in this space. So as Eloise has already said, my name is Cynthia. I'm Zimbabwean born, and I am very passionate about everything that has to do with the continent of Africa, anything that has to do with our heritage, our development, and our progressive thinking. So I just titled our conversation today around cultivating success and creating a thriving environment for growth. Because sometimes we are looking at success and we're trying to look at so many nuggets. We're trying to look at so many ways that we can be able to enhance where we are so that we get to a future that's better than where we currently are. But many times we are not looking at the environment in which we are actually navigating, or environment that we are allowing ourselves to live in. More importantly, the environment that we ourselves are creating within our body, mind, soul, and spirit. So sometimes we're placing this demand on the external environment, but some of the conversations that I would like us to have today are interactive internally and interactive externally. What do I mean by that? We need to ask ourselves some very bold and candid questions that speak into the internal environment that we have, our body, mind, soul, and spirit. Are we even together? Is the essential self within us in agreement? So these are some of the things that we are going to be looking at today. Now, I know Eloise has done pretty much justice to just sharing who I am and what I am all about. But one of the things that I want to talk about is what I see BYP being. And this, for me, is a real testament to the strength and potential of the African diaspora. And as we are uniting for collective empowerment and growth, I see us as this formidable movement. I see us as this formidable, huge, massive ball of fiery individuals who are collectively coming together to do great things. And the best way to be able to do that is when we start with our own individual lives and begin to ask ourselves some real questions in terms of Who are we? Our personal identity. I always say leadership starts with leading yourself well. And you need to ask yourself five good questions. Who am I? That's a question of purpose. Do you understand who you are, your identity? Why am I here? Why was I even created? Where am I going? Many times we are making very furiously fast progress, but in the wrong direction. So where am I going? And number four, how am I going to get where I'm going? So that's where we then begin to look at BYP as that very important vehicle. That's where we begin to say, how do I set goals to be able to get where I want to go? And who is going to come alongside me? What's the quality of my network? It's not so much about how many people you know. It's not so much about the quantity, but it's the quality of the people. So we just want to delve into how we can create both these internal and external spaces for thriving success. And I personally have a little bit of a challenge with that word success, because I tend to want to speak more in terms of significance. How do you live a life of significance? How do you live a life that's worth a legacy? How do you create a legacy that even after you're gone, songs can be sung about you and people can still talk about the great things that you have done and who you were, the essence of who you are. So I really want to talk a whole lot about living a significant life. So the first thing is to establish that growth is intentional. It flourishes where it is nurtured. So I'm going to open the floor, and I would like us to just type in the chat. Maybe Eloise, you can help me just to look at any hands that may be coming up. My first question would be, how are you nurturing your environment for growth? What are those things that you are using to nurture your environment for growth? So remember, we're looking at this quote that I've just put out there, and I've said growth is intentional. It flourishes where it is nurtured. So I want you to think about nurturing as that kind of environment where something can begin to blossom. You want to think of a seed that's been put in whether it's in the soil or in whatever kind of environment, and you want that seed to grow. So I'm just looking out in the chat. I'm not sure if there's anyone raising hands, but I would really love, okay, thank you so much, Kamchirai. Reading books and relevant courses, that's a great way to nurture ourselves, because when you're reading books, you're nurturing your mind, and that really sets you off on a very positive trajectory. Eloise, thank you. Growing my network intentionally. Again, there's that word intentionality. And it's the environment that you develop, that network around you, which really helps you ultimately to be able to flourish. All right. I'm sure other responses will come as we go, but that's a very important question. How am I actually creating environment that nurtures me? Now, moving along, I want us to think about the greenhouse. I'm not sure how many of us are familiar with the greenhouse, not just the concept, but the effect, the greenhouse effect. Technology has become so fast advanced now that there are places where an environment can be created in a greenhouse where a harvest can actually be gathered in a very short space of time, whereas something might have taken ordinarily maybe a couple of months. But we find that when you create a particular environment that causes something to thrive, you are actually able to have that greenhouse effect. So the greenhouse nurtures plants to thrive by providing the ideal conditions. You've got the light there, you've got the water, you've got the nutrients. So if you can see that picture that I just put there in the background, I want you to think about the greenhouse effect in your own personal life. And I want you to begin to start thinking about, what that light source is in your life. What is that water that is watering you, and what are those nutrients that you have created in your environment? So our growth definitely depends on the environments that we're creating, because we need clarity. In the absence of clarity, most times we're just fumbling in the dust. We're fumbling in the dark. And many times we are not seeing where we're going. It could be because we've got too many voices that we're listening to. And, if there is no vitality, something dies. If there is no purpose, like I say, the first 5 questions that I spoke about earlier on, who am I? Why am I here? Those are questions of identity and purpose. If we don't have clear answers to that, chances are we're just grappling in the dark. So the key components of a thriving environment, number one is community. And I love how this BYP community, I was just looking at the LinkedIn community that it is, and it's amazing, absolutely amazing to just see how people have got testimonies just by being connected to this community. And mentorship for me is a very critical ingredient. It's a pillar. It's a pillar because when you have someone who's a mentor in your life, they have seen further than you have. And if you're able to stand on their shoulders, you can see so much further because they can actually tell you and say, hey, I was exactly where you were 20 years ago, and there's a big pothole right there. And if you just take another step in that direction, you're gone. You might not make it up. So, who is mentoring you? So, mentorship is vital. This is the time of the year where you want to relook and audit your relationships and begin to ask yourself, who are the people I'm allowing to speak into my life in the areas where I want to grow? Who am I reaching out to help me to grow? Because sometimes we are creatures of habit. We stay in our comfort zones because we have become so accustomed to certain people and they have become our mentors for a very long time. There's nothing wrong with that. But then also, life is about seasons and times, and they shift. There will be a time when you actually outgrow a mentor. And I'm so excited that Gamu is here. She is one very vibrant individual who I have watched, had the opportunity to see grow in leaps and bounds. I remember when we started, we had what was a mentor and mentee relationship. But when I look now, I'm like thinking, okay, I may need to go to Gamo and she may need to mentor me on one or two things. So it's really amazing how, sometimes as season shifts, sometimes you may even end up outgrowing your mentors. So you need to be constantly asking yourself, am I still being fed from this life source? Okay. And then, of course, growing resilience. And for me, I've always spoken about resilience as a muscle because when we have resilience, we are able to continually work that muscle. And even when adversity comes, even when setback comes and it pushes back, it pushes us, we're able, like an elastic band, to just snap back and, be able to just go right back and do what needs to be done. So I just want to share a personal story. A couple of I would say months now, but I can even still call it weeks. So I have a very favorite show of mine. It's called the Dear Future Wifey podcast. It premieres every Wednesday morning. Some of you might know it. It's hosted by Lateris R. Whitfield. And he's been hosting this for a number of years. And on this particular Wednesday, it coincided with what was the Thanksgiving holiday here in the USA. And I tuned in and he was interviewing Dr. Juanita Bynum. And there were things there that they discussed which really reached to the core of me as she was just sharing her own personal journey, the pitfalls that she had gone through in her own personal journey, in a ministry journey, in her own professional development and growth. And they say the statement right at the end, right towards the end. I think he had asked a question and he said, now, what would you tell someone who is trying to make it, but, is still struggling and doesn't have the confidence? And, she said a couple of things and she shared a few nuggets from a very deep spiritual space. And then she says, people need to realize that in spite of all the scars, in spite of everything that has happened to you, you are whole enough to go and do what you need to do. Now, this was was this the 26th or the 27th of November? I was listening to this and I thought, wow, and it just hit me like that. And I just started scribbling down notes and I said, this is profound. And I started writing a book. Within 48 hours, I had wrapped up that book. I literally had sleepless nights. I had not necessarily set out to say, oh, I'm going to write a book, but I had actually said to myself, at the end of this last quarter, I need to at least release a couple of books. And when I set out to do this, that goal was big, hairy, audacious, because I just did not have the time. I'm currently juggling a very demanding role in my professional work life and, so many other family commitments. So why am I sharing this story with you? Because I set myself a goal and I said, Cynthia, if you're going to sit on this journey, if you're going to sit on this path, you are going to need to make sure that you've executed on this thing within the next 72 hours. I was able to set that goal for myself because previously I've had other published works which I have completed maybe, I'd say, within 2 weeks or some much longer. But this time I said, because of the kind of pressure that I am in right now, if I'm going to sit on this, I'm not going to have this book lingering in the air for so long. So I had set that goal and I said, this has to be out by Christmas. So goals provide the framework for growth. They shape and they guide our journey. So I started working on this. I had the concept. I was thinking, okay, what would the cover look like? What do I want to talk about? And in one of my previous books, Destination Wholeness, I'd spoken about kintsugi. I know most of you would be familiar with the concept of kintsukuroi or kintsugi, that Japanese art where something that has been broken is made more beautiful by having the molten gold put in the cracks. So that's what I had in mind for this cover. And I will tell you, this was the hardest thing because I was trying to explain this concept. I created the concept in one of my packages and I was trying to share it with my design team, and it took a very long time until someone got a little bit close to what I was looking for. But I was so set on this, and because of that, that created that framework that I needed. And I say, this is the goal. It's got to look close to this because I have that in my spirit and I want to see that manifest. So many of the things that we want to manifest need to have resided somewhere deep within us. It has got to be a vision that's embedded in the deep spirit, in the soul realm. It's got to be something that we are seeing with our mind's eye very constantly, very regularly. It's got to be something that makes us sleepless. And when you have that goal in front of you, especially when it's written down, it gives you that framework for growth. It shapes and it guides your journey. So I would not allow myself to sleep. I said, I will not sleep until I do this. And then on the third and final day, I then composed a song to go with this. So it's very important for you to have clarity because you want to make sure that your well-defined goals are offering some focus. I needed to be focused. Who am I writing this for? Why am I writing this? Is my intention simply because, oh, well, you haven't released a book this year yet? Or is it because I'm focused on what I want to develop as my brand, as my calling, as my purpose, as my assignment? And direction. This gave me the direction to then say, if this is what I want to develop as a product, to go out there, who exactly do I want to speak to? what is my goal? So I had to put things down in terms of what would be the reach, what would be the target audience. And that then helped me as I was navigating around the writing, and then sustained motivation. So if I did not have this goal set before me, I could have just easily thrown in the hat and say, hey, I'm tired. I'm justified to grab my sleep, but I was dedicated and committed. So having a vision that lives vividly in the inside of you is very important. Having a plan, how are you going to get around this, and then putting in the action. And remember, you have got to be the key driver of that action. You cannot wait for other people to make it happen for you. You've got to make it happen. Then at least you get to that place of achievement. So that is what moves you from idea to success. So when we talk about vision boards, how many of us here have got vision boards? Can I just see, maybe by showing of hands? I'm just going to try and go through the screen. Oh, thank you, Barbara. Dr. Barbara Mtedzi is joining us all the way from Malaysia. She says being around people who are like-minded and are on the same path that I'm moving toward. I love this. Takai says cutting back on content that doesn't help you grow. Daniela says following positive role models and mentors. And okay, Barbara, I love that. Moving away from what no longer serves my growth, including people, tangible objects, food, clothes, and homes. Barbara, if you are able to unmute, I would love to hear a little bit more about this journey. What has it taken for you to actually move away from what no longer serves your growth and, the people? Because for me, the people is what I've found is one of the most difficult elements to detach from, because sometimes you become so attached to certain relationships, yet they're actually suffocating you and they're stunting your growth. Now, because I'm sharing my screen, I may not be able to see if you're unmuted, but Barbara, if you are unmuted and if you are able to use your audio, I'd really love to hear a little bit more about you moving away from what no longer serves your growth. Go right ahead, Barbara. I'm finding this really exciting. I love that comment. And I think for me, particularly, the points that you have raised are so poignant, because moving away from people, I found that's usually the most challenging thing. Tell us a little bit more about that.
If I could use some of the wisdom that you've already shared around having a goal, my goal, my life purpose has always been to help other people harness and control the power they already have within themselves to live and lead a life of and on purpose. And as a coach, one of the things that I'm very adamant about is I won't teach or coach you something that I haven't gone through. And so for me to be able to, because one of my biggest goals is to be a coach for national presidents, for me to be able to be in rooms with national presidents, being able to talk about policies, being able to talk about leadership at national level, I need to be educated around that. I need to find myself in speaking in a way that they understand and I understand them. I need to be in an environment that allows me to step into that higher purpose of who I am. And speaking to the things around goals, it's whatever goals come into your mind as an individual, they are unique to you. They are God-given. I'm just going to use the word God in case you're a Christian, or you can use whatever word speaks to you depending on your religion. Because our goals don't come from nowhere. They come because it is something that we really want inside of ourselves, as you yourself, Cynthia, have already mentioned. And so it's almost like that's the path that you are destined to choose if you want to lead and to move toward. And so because I was clear and I am clear on my goal and my life purpose, it makes it so much easier to start looking toward people who are in that space already, so that I can spend more time with them, understand how they have become who they are, and also just start learning from that environment. And without even automatically cutting out other people, because I am deliberately spending time with the people in the environments that I want to go toward, that leaves less time for the people who don't serve my goals, not because they are bad people or there's bad blood between us or arguments. It's just that there's no longer time in the 24 hours we have per day, because I am clear on my goal. I know where I want to be. I know the time that I need to take to be in that space. And so that automatically removes people from that space. The other thing is, even in conversations with the people that we've grown up with, whether it's family or friends, when you yourself have grown, you start seeing that the conversations are not at the level that you want to be. And you actually find yourself fumbling for words because you no longer speak that language. And that's another easy way of spending or choosing to spend less time with people. And it's not because you don't like them, it's just that you're in different pathways. If you think of classrooms, for example, some people are in one class, you might be doing the same subjects, but other people might be in another class. It doesn't mean that one person or the other is bad or good. It's just that that's the path that you're on. So goal setting, I think, is just reiterating what you're already saying, Cynthia. It comes from within you, and then making the plan to move toward what it is that you want to do and acting toward that vision so that you can actually achieve it. But it does start with you clearly defining what that goal is.
Wow, that's really profound, Barbara. I love how you have started, even just from that spiritual pivot where you are speaking about a realm that's intangible and saying whatever it is that we have as a foundation of our faith becomes that springboard from where that vision emanates. Because without that, clearly you have not yet been able to tangibly hold on to that thing that you're looking toward, but there's got to be somewhere where an image is formed deep within you where you can see that vision. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I love the aspect about how naturally, by changing your mindset and gravitating towards a particular pathway, in itself begins to cut out certain relationships. And those are some of the things that, of course, tend to keep us out of focus and distract us in many ways. I'm just trying to see if there's anyone who has their hands up. Eloise, if please do feel free to just chime in if you do see anyone with their hands. But I'm going to go ahead, and thank you so much, Barbara, for sharing that. So clarity, focus, discipline, and growth, those go hand in hand. You cannot do without having clarity, without being focused, without being disciplined. So sometimes it's going to mean that if you want to achieve that goal, whether it's a fitness goal, whether it's a goal to network and increase your network and associations, you've got to be disciplined. So if you want to be seen and you want to be present, you've got to be presentable. And what does presentable mean? Presentable goes beyond just how you look as a person. It's how you package yourself in the different platforms where you are presented. So how do you discipline yourself in that way to be constant, to be consistent, so that when people are coming to knock and look for you, they're not wondering, well, we found them here yesterday. They're no longer there. Can we actually invest in them? So can we trust them? Without discipline, you will not be able to achieve that sustained growth, which we're talking about today. Now, moving along, I would like us to just talk about a couple of steps that can help us to navigate our goals. Now, you will see on this other side of the screen, there is this very tender plant, and you can see the water aspect that we were talking about. And the first thing is you've got to start by planting the seed. You do that by defining your vision. Because if you are not able to define your vision, if you're not able to write that vision and make it plain, how does flourishing look like for you? Because what metric you use for your flourishing will determine if you feel that you have arrived or you have clinched that thing that you're looking for. Because without that planting, you cannot place an expectation. You cannot go and reap somewhere else where you have not planted. So the seed can be an idea. So the first question we have to ask ourselves today on the 24th of January is, what does flourishing look like for me if I am to get to the top of the year 2025, December the 31st, and if I say I have thrived and I've flourished this year, what does that really look like? And then secondly, you've got to nourish. And this nourishing is just not nourishing, but nourishing with care. So this is where you're now breaking your vision into actionable steps and begin to say, okay, how do I then attain this by taking this step and then moving from here and shifting to the next dimension or the next level towards my growth? And then number three, being consistent, the consistent light and water. Now that really speaks more into committing to aligned. And I will continue underlining that word, because if there's no alignment in your actions, and if those actions are not consistent, it becomes very, very difficult for you to be able to talk about having growth. Sometimes the things that we do are misaligned, and this is where we end up doing things that are out of proportion. So alignment and consistent actions are very, very important. And then the fourth one is being able to prune for growth. Now, this one is like a big ouch, because, when you're looking at pruning, it's like things that you have become so accustomed to are slowly being, removed. And that's not a very favorable status quo, because pruning has got to do with what are those things that are like leeches that are stuck on you, and they are taking from you and taking from you. But sometimes it's because we have become so accustomed to it, and those things have literally become a part of us. And so when they're taken away from us, it's like we're screaming and we're yelling, no, this was my friend, we were buddies all the way from high school. And, I can't lose this person. But, there comes a point where you realize that until a separation takes place, and unfortunately, separation doesn't always take place in very nice ways. Sometimes the goodbye is necessary, but it's not always the most comfortable. So you've got to be adjusting and refining your goals as the challenges are arising, so that you can prune yourself for growth. And adjustments and refining are really more, you're looking at that sandpaper effect. And the sandpaper, if you know anything about it, it's painful, it's rough, because it's cutting out the rough edges. And sometimes it's through having those vibrant networks of people around you that you can actually have iron sharpening iron. And then being able to then celebrate the harvest and acknowledging milestones and progress. And I think this is a step that many of us actually take a misstep. And the reason I say that is many times we actually don't take time to celebrate milestones, because we're like, oh, well, it was just that, and that little thing that has propelled you forward, when you fail to acknowledge it, it takes away from you, because you're not actually acknowledging that, what, you've actually been able to harvest from that seed that you planted. I love that question that you have there, Gamo, about the difference between a goal and a resolution. I don't know if someone on the floor would want to take it up before I do. I'm just taking some time to check on what's on the chat, and Gamo says, what is the difference between a goal and a resolution? Are there any takers? Any takers? And I think this is a very common question, especially at this time, when most people are saying, oh, well, my New Year's resolution is such and such. And many times, unfortunately, we actually don't stick to some of those resolutions. So I don't know if there are any takers there.
Cynthia, I'm happy to sort of give a go whilst everyone else is having a think. I mean, in my mind, a goal is almost something that's probably well defined, it's been thought out, has been driven by maybe intrinsic or extrinsic motivations, right? So when you're at work, for instance, you're thinking, well, okay, I need to achieve this milestone because otherwise, worst case scenario, I get fired, or best case scenario, I get a bonus this year, etc., etc. Whereas I feel with a resolution, it's more of it's almost, in my mind anyway, it's almost like wishful thinking. You're thinking, and I'd love to, I don't know, lose an extra 10 pounds or something like that, right? Or something. And therefore, there isn't necessarily that thought process, perhaps, and that to, those 5 steps that you talked about earlier, that's probably not gone into it. But that would be my view. But happy to be challenged on that or get other people's views.
I love that. That's a great view right there. Anyone else on the floor who wants to take on the floor? I love, I think especially that particular example you used, because I find many people at the beginning of the year, that is their resolution, it's round weight. So again, that specificity is not there. You're not actually specific to actually say, okay, if I'm talking about losing weight, I'm not just making it a broad goal, but I'm actually saying, okay, I'm going to lose 10 pounds this year, and I'm going to do that in 3 months, and I'm going to do that by exercising 3 times a week, and I'm going to do that by following a healthy eating plan. Then that becomes a goal. Whereas, resolution, it's quite broad. It's a commitment, right? It's a decision to change or adopt a new habit, but it's got less structure, and that's why I think we're talking about steps. And so, for example, if someone would just say, oh, well, this year I'm just going to live healthier, so that's really, really quite broad. So without that time frame, without the structure, without the focus, I think that would just keep that as a resolution. Barbara says the resolution is a decision, whereas the goal is more activity oriented. Absolutely. And that's the key operative word, the activity orientation that we have there. Thank you so much for that question. And again, like I said, that's a very important conversation to be having at this time of the year. Now, we want to look at tackling obstacles. I've had a fair share of curveballs in my life. I don't know who else in the room might have had that, but sometimes you have set such a clear goal, and you know, and you're so clear in your mind's eye, this is where I'm going. But then you're met with all these obstacles. You're met with these little creepy things that just come in your path. And the question is, how do you actually overcome the weeds in your path? The question is, can you even differentiate the weeds from the real thing? So, the common challenges that we have, the fear of failure. I know many people are really held back from setting goals because they're just afraid to fail. They're just afraid to fail. And sometimes that's because they actually do not have a frame of reference of success. And sometimes this frame of reference could actually be maybe even from their family line. There's no one who has achieved some of those feats. So even their own family would question them and say, no, sit down, my child, like we say in Africa. Tell me, your grandmother, your grandmother, right? She died at a ripe old age of 98. She was a hardworking woman, but trust me, wise as she was, and they'll go on. So that fear of failure is something that can actually cripple us. And then distractions. I mean, distractions just come in so many ways. And sometimes it starts out like something good. It could be like, oh, wow, I'm going to spend just so much time maybe working on my social media branding. And before you realize it, that can actually end up being a distraction, because when you're in that space, you end up losing focus, and because there's just so much, especially in this age where we've got information overload. There's just so much that can distract you once you start going on the streets of Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. They're great spaces if you're someone who's got the discipline to know what you're there to do, and you're out once you've done what you need to do. So those distractions are very important, and many times it's also the voices that we listen to. What kind of voices are you listening to? And most times it's the inner voices. Sometimes it's even the childhood traumas that we have gone through that come through, and they sabotage us. And then the lack of resources. Sometimes the things that we want to do at that time are not there. And this then stands in the way for us being able to achieve what you want to achieve. But how do you overcome this? There are lots of strategies that you can overcome some of these challenges. Then the first one is building accountability with mentors or partners. And this is why it's really great that we are at this forum and we are within this network and community, because therein here we can find accountability. We have got mentors, we've got partners that you can say, hey, can you partner with me on this goal? This is what I'm wanting to do. This is what I'm wanting to achieve. And then being able to use small wins to build momentum. I think earlier on I spoke about being able to celebrate milestones. And sometimes when we don't get to celebrate the milestones, those small milestones, we then don't develop and build the momentum that we need to help us, to just have that impetus to take on the huge stride towards the next goal. And then being able to reframe our obstacles as opportunities for growth, because sometimes what looks like obstacles is actually an opportunity for you to grow. So if we don't take time to ask ourselves and say, this thing that is actually standing in my path, how can I actually convert that and look at that as an opportunity for me to grow? I don't know if there's anyone here who might want to share a time when they've had an obstacle in their life that they've used as an opportunity for growth. Anyone who might want to share any such time, or just an example of a situation where you've had an obstacle and then you've actually taken that to grow you. I mean, there are many things that look like obstacles or that can be obstacles. You are free to raise your hands or just drop something in the chat.
I can have a go first and sort of then see if anyone else wants to join in. But in my role, I started as sort of a strategy manager maybe about 3 years ago, right? And it was a bit of a sidestep move in terms of my career. And when I first started, like I was actually quite terrible at, like, I suppose the skills that you required to sort of be successful in that role, especially sort of PowerPoint building, telling a cohesive story, etc., etc. And I think for like maybe the first 2 or 3 months, my line manager would send back the work and be like, oh no, like change this, change that. I remember like, being quite demoralized. And I remember thinking like, oh, they're picking on me, da 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 da, this is so unfair. And then one day I decided that I was going to sort of flip it on its head. And I was going to be like, you know what, let me actually, I'm sick and tired of constantly being criticized. So you know what, I'm going to go out and learn. And so I remember sort of researching into, okay, what do you need to do to be good as a sort of consultant? How do you sort of pull packs together? And then I remember sort of reaching out to him directly and sitting myself down and saying, look, I want to get better. So what was wrong with this pack? Can you explain it to me? And sitting down and sort of going through it bit by bit. And in doing so, actually, it helped to build that relationship with us as well, because he appreciated me coming out and sort of saying it. And I then knew, okay, almost like wrote down a list of do's and do nots almost. And so like 3 years on, I think that's really helped me in terms of like building my building my profile, building my capabilities, building myself as, someone who is, quite good at all of this. And the sum total of that is like, recently I've been sort of leading on a piece of work where I've been acting as a trusted advisor to a senior exec who needed a paper written, right? So it's a professional example, but, an example of when actually, you can use an obstacle or something that you find irritating to your advantage.
Exactly, and without irritation, we wouldn't have pearls, right? So that's a really powerful example there that you've shared. And I'm telling you, it's not easy to take on criticism, and especially if it's coming from a superior, because it sometimes can demotivate you. And again, it even depends on the way that it comes, because it's not everyone who's very gracious in their speech and words. So when you have set that goal before you and you've got that vision, you have to remain focused. Again, you cannot allow that critical feedback to even be a distraction to you. So thank you so much for sharing that, anyways. So you can actually reframe your obstacles and use that as an opportunity for growth. And as we wrap up, I want us to just talk about how we can actually empower, um, you know, ourselves, because many times we look at empowerment as coming from somewhere else, and we don't look at how we as a community have got so much wealth through collective impact. One of the books that I published in 2016 is called The Wealthy Diary of African Wisdom. And in that book, I talk about how it's so sad that the African human capital and the son and daughter of the African soil tends to prefer everything else that's not African and finds that to be superior. And I say that's quite a tragedy, because we have a huge wealth, a depth of wealth that we have not just only inherited, but we are, as a people, a very, not just a resilient people, but we are deeply resourced. This is why even when we go to different spaces, even within the international and global landscape, we are able to be handpicked for very critical and significant roles. So this is something that we should never undermine. So resilience and creativity within the African diaspora is something that we have and we should continue to develop and to encourage. For those of us here who have younger siblings and children, this is something we want to make sure that we're continuing to inspire them and motivate them to become. And the importance of shared networks, I could never I can't say enough of that, because if we are just as individuals, the individualistic growth curve is not sustainable. And whether we're talking about our Ubuntu, whether we are talking about how just as a community of African people, we have stronger explosive power to do greater things. For as long as we embrace that mindset, we'll realize that we can actually create spaces for mutual support and vitality. And one thing that I've found is, typically when people move out to go into the diaspora, there is this identity shift, or some kind of I don't know how to call it, a crisis, but it would almost feel as though people are now trying to, in their attempt to adapt, in their attempt to adjust, in their attempt to acclimatize, they can end up losing some of that identity, and as a result shun away from just being the collective amazing people that we are. So as we grow, let's commit to lifting others in our community. And this is just really something that I would love for us to continue to talk about. So let's plant seeds for our future, and let's begin to ask ourselves, what's the kind of greenhouse that I've cultivated for myself? And remember, the greenhouse is this environment, is this atmosphere, is this climate that you have created in spite of, despite the external, despite whatever it is that's happening in the economy, and whether you're looking at the pastel, or whatever other environmental factors you're looking at, you're saying, how do I create a greenhouse? Or how do I develop and cultivate myself within that greenhouse? What are some of the things I need to insulate myself from? And how do your goals align with your purpose and your legacy? So one of the exercises that I always have done over the years is to help people to just see that final day of their lives. And I'm saying, when you are able to visualize yourself in that space where you have now transcended from this physical life that you were on the earth, and you are able to begin to imagine what people are saying about you, I want you to begin to think about your eulogy. Who is even going to read your eulogy, and what are they going to say about you? What is that legacy that's going to be written about you? By just starting with that end in mind, it really then helps you to trace back, like Barbara was talking about, the goals. How do you then set those goals so that they're feeding ultimately into your purpose and your legacy? So the next steps from here, as we leave this meeting and gathering, is for each and every one to at least identify one actionable goal for this week. And I think one of the things that we said in terms of the key differentiator between resolutions and goals is that our goals are activity-based, activity-oriented. So what's the actionable goal that you have for the next 7 days that you're saying, as I work towards my purpose and legacy, this is at least the one goal that I can stand and say, next week, Friday, this time, I will be holding this and saying, yes, I was able to achieve this by the 31st of January, and being able to explore opportunities within the BYP community. I'm fairly new to this community, and I'm so excited that I got invited to be a part of this community. And I know just from the little that I've actually seen, just looking at the online digital footprint, that this is a vibrant community and that there exist opportunities. But the question is, are you intentional? Are you deliberate about putting yourself out there, about looking for the things that align with your goals, looking out for the opportunities? Because they are there if you actually take time to connect with the right people and resources. So I think these are things that I would really love to challenge all of us, and then to really think about, what seeds will I plant today? What seeds will I plant today? What vision will I begin to formulate in my mind? What will I allow my mind's eye to see? Because sometimes we are seeing what the environment is dictating. We are not actually seeing what could be in spite of. So that then becomes the essence of how we can actually thrive and flourish. So I just want to end by just challenging us to really take some bold steps towards creating that thriving environment and being able to build our legacy. Because our legacy, your legacy, it starts with the seeds that you actually plant today. So for me, goal setting has remained something that continues to stand out. I cannot see how I can progress without that. I cannot see how I can progress without the framework, because goals provide that framework that I need for growth to shape and to guide my journey. So these are just some of the few nuggets that I thought I would share with us. And I believe and I know that most of these things are not new to many of us, but as we start the new year, it's a good time and a place for us to just remind each other of some of these things. So Eloise, I'll hand over to you. If we still have some time for questions and answers, I will be so glad to interact.
Of course. I mean, I know that we had about an hour or so and we're at 1:01. But if anyone had any last questions, please do feel free to put it into the chat. And we'd also love to sort of continue the conversation. So if you could leave your email in the chat as well, that would be great. I can see Barbara just said, thank you, Cynthia. This was so very helpful. And I have to admit, I have to sort of echo that sentiment. This has been immensely powerful. And I think for me, what I've taken away from this is almost like starting from that who am I, why am I here point of view, right? And then sort of working on from there rather than sort of thinking about a goal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anyone had any questions or anything that they wanted to ask Cynthia whilst we're here. I can see Gamu's got her hand up. Don't know if you wanted to ask something, Gamu.
Hiya. It's a combination of a comment and expression of gratitude to Cynthia. So thank you for being a long-standing mentor. And this session I was in and out, but from what I heard, it was absolutely amazing. And so thank you for continuing to be a wholeness expert and for planting seeds in everybody that you meet. I think the seed that has been replanted in me, and also I'm motivated more to what do I do with that seed? So in terms of watering it and looking after it, because we make a lot of goals, but like you said, it needs the discipline and the follow through to make sure that we attain those goals. So thank you very much for being a fountain of wisdom and for always just willing to hold up, especially Africa, and making sure that you're part of, that we're aware of our identity as Africans. So thank you very much.
Yeah, so
Great
once
to
again,
meet
thank you
you.
all for joining.
Thank you for having me,
Thanks.
ladies. All
Especially
right
the
then.
press before the sun is even up. I definitely know that I'm not functioning.
Well,
Like,
so
Right.
much about
8
being
o'clock.
in the globally connected community, right? Yes, so we are so grateful. Thank you so much, ladies. I'm going to take my leave today, and I'll leave the rest of you to enjoy the rest of your afternoon and
Thank you.
evening.
Take care.
And good night.